Following the recent arrest warrant for Israel's prime minister, one of his predecessors and staunch critics weighs in.
The overwhelming majority of Israelis, including myself, was that this is, in a way, is an unfair and unjustified warrant. There was not a policy, there was not an order, there was not a decision, and there was not a calculated attempt to kill innocent people.
But will Palestinians accept any peace initiative without accountability over Gaza?
I think we need to be prudent. I think we need to wait. And I think we have to rely on the judgment of very important and neutral judges, whether in the ICJ or in the ICC.
Hello, I'm Rida Fakhri. Welcome to the program. Today we take a look at the prospects for justice and peace in Israel and Palestine following the International Criminal Court's arrest warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. They stand accused of crimes against humanity and war crimes, including the starvation of civilians as a method of warfare. As Gaza lies in ruins with millions of Palestinians displaced and tens of thousands killed, calls for accountability have grown more urgent. It is against this backdrop that two former high-ranking Israeli and Palestinian politicians have proposed a pathway to end the violence and rebuild trust. Former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert and former Palestinian Foreign Minister Nasser al-Kidwa launched their joint initiative last July. They recently met with several European leaders to garner support for their proposal. They also met with Pope Francis, who's called for an investigation into potential genocide in Gaza. But can this plan bridge the deep divide between Israelis and Palestinians and bring about a just and lasting solution? The joint initiative calls for the release of all Israeli hostages in Gaza and an agreed number of Palestinians held in Israeli jails. It also calls for the establishment of the State of Palestine alongside the State of Israel, based on the 1967 borders with a corridor linking Gaza to the West Bank. The Palestinian state will be non-militarized, but will have its own security force for internal policing. The exchange of territory, with Israel annexing 4.4% of the occupied West Bank in return for the State of Palestine receiving territory of equal size within Israel. A ceasefire in Gaza, the full withdrawal of Israeli forces, and the deployment of a temporary Arab security presence to stabilize the situation in cooperation with the proposed Palestinian security force. The creation of a Palestinian entity, a council of commissioners, linked to the Palestinian Authority and made up of technocrats to rebuild and run Gaza. General elections in Gaza and the West Bank to take place within 24 to 36 months. But is this plan realistic? Can it overcome decades of distrust? Joining us now to discuss their joint proposal are former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert and former Palestinian Foreign Minister Nasser al-Kidwa. Former Prime Minister Olmert, former Foreign Minister al-Kidwa, thank you both so much for being with me. It's incredibly unusual to have a former top Israeli official and a former top Palestinian official join forces at a time like this when there is so much pain and anger on both sides. To you first, Prime Minister Olmert, how does the recent arrest warrant for the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu play into the political dynamics in Israel today, and how does it affect the future prospects of any peace agreement?
Well, obviously, I have to say that the initial reaction of the overwhelming majority of Israelis, including myself, was that this is, in a way, is an unfair and unjustified warrant. I know that everyone is fully aware of the enormous number of innocent people killed in this terrible encounter between us and Hamas in Gaza. One has to remember that, in the first place, when all the world leaders say that Israel has a right to react against what happened, the massacre, the atrocious massacres of so many thousands of Israelis, it was obvious that the Israeli reaction will take place in Gaza, which is densely populated and where the Hamas people are all involved and embedded within the civilian population, it was virtually impossible to believe that one could refrain completely from hitting civilians, and everyone in the world said Israel has a right to react. Unfortunately, I think it has gone far beyond what is acceptable and tolerable, but I believe, I really, truly, genuinely believe that there was not any policy, certainly not any direction given by the Israeli Prime Minister or the Minister of Defense to shoot indiscriminately in the densely populated area in Gaza. Therefore, I don't think that it can be established, I mean, that the charges can be proved against them, and I think that it's really unfair. That does not mean in any way that I support the Israeli Prime Minister. I think that the Prime Minister of Israel should have been fired long ago. Therefore, I don't
Hold
think
on, Prime Minister. It's one thing to say that he should have been fired long ago. It's quite another to say that it's unfair to hold him accountable for the war crimes, crimes against humanity, that many of the world's leading human rights organizations have accused him of, given the tens of thousands of civilians dead. Do you not believe that he should be held accountable and that he should be prosecuted and brought to The Hague?
The fact is that there was a legal process initiated against Israel in the International Court of Justice, and they didn't order Israel to stop the war, and they didn't find Israel responsible for war crimes and genocide. So therefore, I think that to assume that there were war crimes and that he is personally accountable for it, and the Minister of Defense, I think it's unfair. I think it's not based on any proof that can be accepted in a court of law. And the fact is that, as I said, it was tried in the International Court of Justice in The Hague, and they didn't even order Israel to stop the war. We have to distinguish between two different things. These arrest warrants were, as I said, I think are unjustified, shouldn't have been issued in the first place. On the other hand, what Netanyahu is doing inside the state of Israel to democracy, to the unity of our people, to the solidarity that has characterized the state of Israel, to the legal system, to our democratic institutions, is intolerable, unacceptable, and he should have been arrested by the Israeli police for doing all of this. But it has nothing to do with the International Criminal Court in The Hague.
So you say he shouldn't be brought to justice. Dr. Kidwa, I wonder to what extent you agree with former Prime Minister Olmert. Palestinians have long demanded and yearned for peace with justice and accountability. Can they have peace,
Yes.
meaningful peace, without justice?
Yes, listen, obviously we haven't discussed this topic, the action taken by the ICC, the two of us. And I, at the same time, understand as a politician where Mr. Olmert comes from. I mean, it's difficult to oppose broad public opinion on this issue. But of course, at the same time, we disagree on this. I think it's fair, and I think that it should have been done a long time ago. And by the way, it's not accurate what Mr. Olmert said about the other court, the ICJ, that it said that nothing has happened. Actually, it hasn't reached its final conclusion yet. There are 3 cases against Israel in international courts, 2 before the ICJ. One was brought by the Palestinian side on the legality of the occupation, and there was an advisory opinion issued. And the second one, it was brought by South Africa on the basis of the treaty to prohibit the crime of genocide and the punishment of genocide. And the third one is what the prosecutor of the ICC sought, that is the issuance of arrest warrants against 2 Israeli leaders and against 3 Palestinian leaders. Two of them were proven to be deceased and they were not issued arrest warrant. The second one, I think, before the ICJ is the most important one, the one that is waged by South Africa against Israel on the basis of the treaty. And in this regard, again, the final judgment was not reached yet, and I'm sure that judges of the ICJ will found Israel guilty of the accused crime, including the committing of genocide. Again, I do understand where Mr. Olmert comes from, and I know that this is very awkward issue. Nevertheless, I think we need to respect our disagreement on this regard and go ahead.
Mr. Olmert, but isn't this a key issue that does not feature in the peace plan, the issue of peace with justice and accountability?
Look, obviously, Dr. al-Kidwa and myself do not agree on this. And I think that it is certainly not intervening in what we have agreed upon in terms of what should be done in order to stop the war in Gaza and to embark on negotiations for a comprehensive peace between Israel and the Palestinians. Just suffice it to say that while we disagree, and maybe Mr. al-Kidwa is correct in assuming that at some point in the end, the Court of Justice in The Hague will decide on the matter. But at this point, until now, for over more than 6 months, the court discussed this issue and didn't decide and didn't order Israel to stop the war. So I think it will be a little bit premature to assume that it is inevitable that the judgment will be that Israel will be convicted with committing war crimes. For the time being, no court of justice, any place in the world, has made a decision in this direction.
Well,
and,
but Mr. Olmert, the ICJ,
Mr. Olmert,
the ICJ has said that there was a plausible case of genocide and that Israel must do everything to avoid committing genocide and to dismantle its illegal settlements. I mean, it has opined on these issues.
Everyone has to do everything in order to avoid genocide. This is obvious. This is elementary. Of course, we have to avoid anything we can do in order not to commit war crimes. But the court did not decide that we committed war crimes and didn't issue any statement in this direction, didn't even order Israel to stop the war. It said you should be careful not to commit war crimes, and I entirely subscribe to it. We should do everything in our power, everything to avoid any unnecessary victims amongst Palestinian civilians. And I admit and I accept that thousands of innocent civilians were killed, regrettably, in this very tragic confrontation, which started with the Hamas atrocious attacks against Israelis in the south part of the state of Israel.
No, I think we need to agree that judgment is still pending, and it's a bit early to reach any conclusion with regard to the proceedings of the ICJ or the ICC. Again, I think we need to be prudent. I think we need to wait. And I think we have to rely on the judgment of very important and neutral judges, whether in the ICJ or in the ICC.
Mr. Olmert, do you believe that what is going on today is a genocide?
No.
You don't believe it's a genocide? No. Do you believe it's ethnic cleansing? What term would you use to describe what has been going on with the displacement of 2 million Palestinians and the killing of thousands, tens of thousands?
Look, you just heard Dr. al-Kidwa, I think honestly says that there is not yet a judgment about it. So you want me to pass a judgment without being privy to all the complications, all the different...
Actually, I want the opposite. Actually, I want to withhold our judgments and wait for the court.
That's what I said. There is no judgment yet. And therefore, since there is no judgment yet, how can I offer a judgment without having all the necessary information, all the possible complications and complexities which are part of the situation there? What I can say is only one thing, which I think is very significant for me. I am absolutely certain that there was never any order given by the Prime Minister of Israel, whom I don't like and don't support, or from the Minister of Defense, General Gallant, or for any higher ranking Israeli, to shoot indiscriminately and kill innocent civilians while attacking the Hamas. We may have not always been very careful. Maybe, as I assume and as you assumed, and many, that there were many civilians that were killed without being involved in terror or in any military activities. But there was not a policy there was not an order, there was not a decision, and there was not a calculated attempt to kill innocent people. And what will be the final judgment of the International Court of Justice or the ICC? We will know when they have this judgment.
Keeping the legality of it aside, Dr. Kidwa, do you agree with what you just heard? That we cannot make a determination today that there has been a deliberate policy by the Israeli government and Benjamin Netanyahu to target, to target deliberately civilians?
I don't know why we are focused on that at the time we have. I think more important aspects of the horrible situation that exists. But nevertheless, listen, it might be true that the prime minister not order Israeli soldiers to go around and just shoot everybody. But you know, there are other things happen that are horrible. For instance, when you send your planes carrying tons of explosive against situation like Gaza, of course you would expect the death of many people. When you prohibit the entry of certain food and certain needed basic needs, of course you would expect many people to die and to be injured. But you know, again, while I don't agree with the evaluation of Mr. Olmert, I do think that bringing this war to an end and going in the road of peace is probably more urgent than this kind of discussion that might not be, you know, very useful at the end of the day.
You've both been out of political office for a while. Much has happened in the last year alone. Mr. Olmert, how much broad political support do you have among your own constituents in Israel to sell this proposal to them, given the rise of extremism? You yourself have said that the biggest enemy today for Israel is the enemy within.
Look, I'm not judging, since I'm not running, since I'm not in any political position at the moment. I'm not judging every day what is the extent of support given to my ideas or to my initiatives or to the effort I'm making together with Dr. al-Kidwa to promote the chances of serious discussion about the two-state solution and the appropriate way to stop the war in Gaza. What I can say is this: against the common wisdom that there is a complete, total rejection of the idea of a political solution. What I hear from the experts that are measuring it on almost a daily basis is that a substantial majority of the Israelis were well above the 50% or 60%, maybe close to 70%, are in favor of what they call an agreement on the basis of a strong military status for Israel, which is quite a vague statement, okay? But which basically says that Israelis are not against a political solution. They want to have a political solution out of what they think ought to be a military strength, considering the threats that come to Israel, not just from the Hamas and the Palestinians, but also from the Hezbollah, from the Houthis, from the Iranian militias in Iraq and in Syria, and also from the Iranians themselves, with 200 ballistic missiles that were shot at Israel on the 1st of October, just slightly more than a month ago. So again, I don't know to say, and I think that there is presently an opposition to just simply the slogan of a two-state solution. But when you come into a more serious discussion with many Israelis about the complexities and the possible ramification of the lack of an agreement in the future, I think that more Israelis than most people think are in favor of a solution on the basis of an agreement. Of course, while Israel maintains the kind of military strength that is needed in the event that we will be attacked again. I think that there is a room for further campaigning in the international community and also in Israel and in Palestine in order to make sure that the degree of support for negotiations towards a peaceful resolution is there, and we have to pursue it and to insist on it and to make every possible effort in order to achieve it.
Sure, but before you sell, quote unquote, this proposal to the international community, you have to try to sell it and convince the Israeli and the Palestinian publics, who are deeply divided amongst themselves, to accept it. You yourself have said that one of the biggest obstacles and threats to Israel today are those you called, quote, messianic extremist Israelis. How do you ever bring them on board, given the fact that right-wing parties have only increased in popularity since October 7th, Mr. Olmert, and Netanyahu retains the support of almost 50% of the Israeli public, according to recent polls?
No, I'm sorry.
47% believe that he is the right leader for these times.
I'm sorry that you are not accurate, if I may say so. I know this is...
It's a poll in Ma'ariv, Prime Minister.
Greater courage.
A poll in Ma'ariv in September.
It requires a much greater courage from an individual to say to you that you are inaccurate than to fight for a two-state solution internationally.
No, but these are the facts, Mr. Olmert.
In all of the polls that were conducted in Israel over the last year, approximately, sometimes more, sometimes slightly less, 60% of the population say they don't trust Netanyahu and they don't believe that his priorities are the national interest of Israel, rather his own political survivability. So this is the fact. And in every poll, the coalition of Netanyahu receives much less than 50% of the popular support as against the opposition of today. How it will end up at the end of the day in the elections will come, when they will come, I don't know. But Netanyahu has today a very stable majority in parliaments. He doesn't have a majority in the public opinion inside the state of Israel. And this is very significant because what we try to do is to raise the voice of the majority of the Israelis that are not given the opportunity to be interviewed by you or to campaign internationally with such an important person as Dr. al-Kidwa and to speak up for what we believe in. But this is the truth. The majority of the Israelis are against Netanyahu and will do everything in our power to kick out all those terrorists that are today members of the government of Israel. As I think the Palestinians have to get rid of all the terrorists that are part of the Palestinian community and which are damaging and destroying the chances of better life for the Palestinians.
Dr. Kidwa, Mr. Olmert has obviously his, many would say, increasingly right-wing constituents to deal with in the Knesset and outside, and you have got a lot of the hardline Palestinians within Hamas, but also ordinary Palestinian mothers, fathers, children who have lost so much, who have suffered so much devastation over the past year, who will look at you and your effort at peace with Mr. Olmert as a betrayal, some form of betrayal of the Palestinian cause. What do you say to them?
I say they are wrong and you are wrong behind the question. I think that I, as well as I think Mr. Olmert, are people who are struggling for the national interest of our respective people, to start with. Secondly, I do think also, I do believe actually, that the Palestinian situation is very bad, no doubt about that, whether in Gaza or in Ramallah. And the proof is abundant. I think there is no need to get into that. But, you know, changing the Palestinian situation is not something that is going to happen overnight. It will take some time. Now, more importantly, I have to indicate that what you said about the pain and anger on the Palestinian side is correct. But you know what? Especially in Gaza, people want an end to this. It's not true that they want to take revenge only. Of course, revenge is the first feeling in this kind of situation. But then if they think about it a little bit, and they do, they want to get, they want to have this situation ended. and they want a different kind of situation. I mean, you ask anybody in Gaza, and you will be told very clearly. Now, in the West Bank, a little bit less. In Jordan, more than less, and so on and so forth. The rule seems to be the farther you go from the center of action, the less support the idea of reaching peace. But the bottom line is this: we cannot continue as we are. We have to end this road, and we have to find an alternative. And the alternative is definitely a peaceful alternative. And in this regard, I believe that the idea of two states, Israel and Palestine, living side by side on 1967 borders with a swap of land, we agreed 4.4% of the territory, is the only possible alternative, irrespective of educational hallucination. Yeah, you can hear from time to time, but these are not feasible and cannot be achieved.
Can this joint initiative succeed where so many others have failed? Can it muster enough support from Israelis and Palestinians alike, even as the death toll in Gaza continues to climb and the release of Israeli hostages remains elusive? We'll have more of our discussion with Ehud Olmert and Nasser al-Kidwa on our next episode. But for now, from me, Rida Fakhri, and the team, thanks for watching.